third speaker today. We appreciate also any feedback you want to give us on the What's Stuck board on your way out. Fill out a little sticky note. That would be great. As we continue on our path through history today, it's with gratitude and humility and respect that Roberson Museum and Science Center acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Onondaga Nation, which is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who are the indigenous people of this land. Roberson, as stewards, we are honored to display the contributions of this nation and its people have made and continue to make in art, history, and sciences. Please be aware of all exits and silence all devices, cell phone watches, and pagers. Not that you have pagers too much anymore. And this is part 3 of our Path Through History Day. I was just looking through things upstairs in the history exhibit, the Sanborn maps. I'm a little obsessed with those maps from the history department. Our next speaker is Laura Crounse. She's a recently retired public school teacher after 32 years in Binghamton City School District. She had another colleague that she worked with for quite some time. She considers herself a lifelong learner, and one of her favorite things to learn about is the history of Binghamton and its residents. She is a member of the Preservation Association of the Southern Tier, and she serves on the Historic House Tour Committee and as a Spirits Tour docent, which I've also been on that tour. She also works as a museum educator here at the Roberson Museum and Science Center. Thank you, Laura, for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me. So welcome, everyone. I have sort of an outline up here. I can't help myself. Like she said, I was a teacher for many years, so I have to do things the way kind of lesson planning. Welcome to Genealogy Beginning. It's sort of a cross between getting your own genealogy started and local history. I'll be using some local history people to show you how to get started. Just to start off, there's good and bad when you're researching your family. You just have to be ready. You're going to find out some really great things, but you might also find out some not so great things. In my own research, my husband's family has quite a large tree, and we came across Lorenzo Crounse, which was my husband's second great granduncle, and come to find out, he was the governor of Nebraska. We had no idea that my husband had a relative like that. It was interesting, a few years ago, the cemetery where Lorenzo was buried contacted us because they had extra plots in his area and wanted to know if we wanted them. And I said, no, thank you. And then they said, okay, we're going to sell them. So that was a good thing that we discovered. I've discovered many, many good things, but I'm just trying to give an example. Now, my mother's side, her grandfather, and I was telling Denise, my interest in this sort of came from going to the cemetery with my mother to put flowers on the graves. And I used to love to read the names and the dates and everything. So my mother's grandfather died very young at 29. So I said to my mother, you know, what happened? She's from a small town in Pennsylvania where everybody worked on the railroad. And she said he was in the yard and he was hit by a train. I thought that was odd. You know, if you're working in the yard, you're very careful. You know how things happen. Family yore, as I say, family stories. So I was doing some research and she said, well, I'd like to go we went down to Montrose, and that the records are housed in the library in Montrose. And come to find out, he was not hit by a train. He died at 29 of cirrhosis of the liver. So my mother was not too thrilled about that. So you just have to, you know, if you want to dig into the research, I encourage it. I find it fascinating, but you're never really sure what you might come across. So I am a member of Ancestry. I don't work for Ancestry. I'm not promoting Ancestry in any way. There are many resources that are free. So local resources in town where you can actually go in person. The Broome County Historical Society at the library. Actually, Roger Luther is right upstairs now. The second floor. Tons of newspapers. They've got microfiche. A lot about your homes, maps, things like that. Binghamton University Library, you can also go in person there. I'll show you the librarian that's in charge of genealogy. And the Broome County Clerk. The clerk is more about marriage, death, birth, and deeds. However, over the last, I want to say 25 years, I think when you buy your house that you take your deed. But they used to have deeds on file. When I was in college, I did a deed search on where I grew up, my parents' house. But really, most everything can be done online. So like I mentioned, the Binghamton University Libraries, this is the genealogy section. Jeremy Dibble is the librarian that you could contact. There's information here about Ancestry, the Ancestry Library Edition, Roots Web, Family Search. All of these sites pretty much are run by the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They have done and compiled all of this research. The free sites are just not as user-friendly as Ancestry. You have to kind of put a little more effort into it. The county clerk, this website, I will tell you, I have a hard time finding what I need on here. It's kind of convoluted, but you have ways you can go in if you know the person's name and dates of birth and death, but it's really easier to do it on the Latter-day Saint websites. Now, the National Archives, if you are really new to genealogy and you aren't sure how to get started, they have tons of resources. They have videos you can watch about doing genealogy, guide to the records. They actually, you can look at historical records. This is really a great resource. That I use this when I taught, with the kids. Lots of great articles and videos and things to watch. Now, there's Roger, he's upstairs. The Broome County
He actually stepped away, he'll be back.
He'll be back. So, if you go to the Broome County Historian page and you just click this link, that will take you right to the library and the research materials, local newspapers, military index, the 1925 census. There's research that you can do here, and then guides down there, especially if you want to look at a certain town or a village, there are those clerk's offices as well that you can research.
So, Laura, I wasn't born here, so I would have to go to the county and the town where I was born to get that information.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and again, this is connected with the second floor of the library downtown, which is really a great place to visit. Now, this is also free, and this one is a wealth of information. If you have nowhere else to start, maybe you only have a name and you have a date, this would be the place to start. You could put in, basically, we could put in Alonzo. And I know more about him than this, but I'm just going to put in the basics. And let's say you're not sure, is it in Endicott, is it the cemetery in Binghamton, is the cemetery in Johnson City? Just put Broome County. Usually it pops up.
That's how we found out where we had to bury my mother-in-law, by using this site.
Yeah. And then we'll get into this a little bit later. There's two Alonzos. Alonzo's father was also Alonzo, and there's often mistakes. You have to be very careful when you're doing research and verify your sources, because I just happen to know this is Alonzo Sr. This is not where he is buried. He is buried here. There's two separate locations in Floral Ave Cemetery. So Alonzo, the lower picture with the lumber on it, because he actually started the lumber mill, that is where Alonzo Sr. is. So I was saying earlier, when we were chatting, that I try to have 3 resources that verify something. On my tree at one point, I had put someone on there and they weren't my ancestor, and I got an email from them and they weren't too happy, and said, please take them off, and that was my fault because I had only gone by one source. So you wanna make sure that you're backing up all your information, when you're doing that. So Find a Grave, I can't say enough about, that's really a great place to start. So this is a free family, search, again, run by the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Not as user-friendly, as Ancestry, but does have quite a few of the same resources. The 1950 census has just recently been released, so that's why it's sort of a big deal. They released the censuses 70 years after they're taken. So it was released, it should have been released in 2020, and I think with COVID, something happened, it was just released recently. So that's one place if you wanna start your tree. Then they do have the search records as well. But when I show you more about Ancestry, the Ancestry basically does a lot of the work for you. So this, let me see, is, oh, no, you don't need to see that. So back to Ancestry. So you can do a free trial, just have to remember to cancel if you don't want to continue using it. So I'm going to go home.
Do they have sales every once in a while for Ancestry.com?
Right now, usually Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas, they usually have something like that.
Does the free one let you search DNA?
No, my husband did the DNA and my mother did the DNA. That's a charge. Actually, I got it for him for Christmas, and they send it to you, and then you send it back. I was telling them I don't know why my mother did it, because she knew she was like 100% Irish, and it came back 98%. So,
But if you're looking for a person, like my grandfather fathered a child, we know he fathered a child. We don't know the name or anything.
yeah,
So would the DNA search find him?
it might help you find that. I've had that happen to a friend of mine.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and there's a local person that I'll tell you about that their parentage is in question, and I found multiple different things about who it could be. So, and then newspapers.com is also tied in with Ancestry. I'm not a member of that, but you can access newspapers usually at the library, and other places online, so that I don't know if you necessarily would have to spend your money on that. So as far as local history goes, I brought, if you want to get more information about local history, three sources would be, go back to here, the Broome County Historical Society, as I mentioned, Preservation Association of the Southern Tier. Both of those have different programs, and on the Broome County Historical Society, they're archived, and there's actually one on there that Jerry Smith did walking through Spring Forest Cemetery and narrating. There's about the clothing factory fire that happened where many women were killed and are buried in Spring Forest Cemetery. A really good one, if you're a Facebook person, is Historic Binghamton Facebook. If you type anything basically into their search, something comes up. And if you type in a question, they get right back to you. So if you have any local history questions, I would suggest that. And a news site just on Facebook, is it called site? Facebook page? I'm not a very good social media person. That Roger Luther started is Broome County History Facebook. That I think honestly just started maybe 2 weeks ago, and it's great. And Jerry Smith, who used to be the county historian, who had retired, but he's really not retired, he still does quite a bit. He gives tours, I think they're sold out for July through SUNY Broome Continuing Ed. He does downtown Binghamton and the west side, and in the fall, he either does Spring Forest or Floral Lab Cemetery. And he's actually teaching a class as well this year at BCC. I think it's 5 Wednesdays in the summer. If you're interested in local history, I brought some of my local history books. If you'd like to take a look, on sale here. Roberson has some, Barnes and Noble has them, the Broome County Historical Society, the second floor of the library has many. A lot of them are written by Jerry Smith and George Basler. And if people remember George, he wrote for the Binghamton Press for decades, and actually his wife worked with me at Calvin Coolidge. They've written several books. This one is very interesting. It's called On the Seamy Side of the Street, Colorful Characters of Broome County's History. So there's some interesting individuals in here. I have past and present. I try to save things when the press has interesting, this was all historic front pages. And I think on Fridays, Jerry Smith always has a local history piece in the press if you still get it. If not, you can, I know most people do Press Connects online. We still get the paper at my house, which I don't know why sometimes. So feel free at the end if we have questions or if you'd like to take a look at any of the books. All right, so getting started with your genealogy, we're going to look at Alonzo Roberson, we're going to look at Willis Sharp Kilmer, and we're going to look at Rod Serling. And then the two women, Ogarita Booth Henderson, she's the one that is actually in on the seamy side of the street. And when I was doing some research this week, I came across some interesting things. And Helen Gardner, she was a fairly well-known actress during in silent films from Binghamton. And I couldn't find too much on her. It seems to be when you are, again, sort of a patriarchal society, especially back in the 1800s and early 1900s, women, like if I type in Margaret Roberson into Find a Grave, I get nothing.
Really?
And I know where she is because I walked there. Margaret. Now watch, it won't work because I did it earlier.
Yeah.
Is she in Flora Lab?
Yep.
Can you update these, like give them the information you have and they'll update the site?
I'm sorry.
If you know where she is, can
Yeah.
you send them the information and they'll update the site?
Yes, and a lot of them are looking for volunteers that like want people to come and help. I noticed lately, so you can sign up to do that as well. The National Archives is always looking for people. So if I search, I get no matches found. Well, I know her name was Margaret. I know her last name was Roberson. I know she's buried in Broome County. So actually I went back and I put in Johnson City because I know she's at Floral in the huge mausoleum. I'm a terrible typist, I'm sorry. Johnson City, and it usually comes up so you can click on it. Nope. So, I don't know why Alonzo comes right up, but Margaret does not. And I know she's there, so sometimes you have to find another way around if you're looking for somebody specific. All right.
There's 55,000 matches.
Yeah, no, that's another thing on here especially. So if we go to my husband's, I'm just gonna show you how large it is. That's my husband's father's side. They had many children. There's Lorenzo. So I didn't, on purpose, I left Lorenzo's clues. So with Ancestry, you start your tree, people start to pop up, and you get these leaves, which are hints. So that's why this is so easy. They're basically doing it for you. So he's in somebody else's tree. I could look there. You get newspaper, and I know this is him because I know it's Fort Calhoun, but you have to be, make sure, not that there were too many people named Lorenzo Crounse, I don't think. Marriage records. He did serve in the Congress as well. He was in the Civil War, so I chose him because he has so many different records. He was married in Iowa, so we can, I'll show you all the actual records when we get to the local people, but I just wanted to give you an example of Lorenzo. And it's interesting, did you see he was from Sharon Springs, and I know you were talking about Sharon Springs earlier. Everything's connected.
Yeah.
So, you know, people back then had a lot more children, so that's why this is so huge. However, now my mother-in-law's side is not, because, her family came over and talked about war. There's so many stories about her, grandfather coming over from Yugoslavia and landing in Canada and walking to New York, and then was thrown out, and then as an illegal immigrant, and then was let back in, and none of it's true. I found immigration records for him, so, you know, I sort of feel bad sometimes when you burst people's bubble.
Laura, where's Bob on that tree at the bottom, right?
Bob is right there.
Oh, okay.
That's Bob and I.
Okay.
And so then we go, and we had found out his great-great-grandfather Amos is actually buried in Floral Cemetery. He ran A.F. Crounse United Shows, which was a carnival, and their main draw was Spydora, the woman who is half spider, half woman.
Wow.
So, bizarre. And I could find a lot of newspaper articles about, and ads. It seems like they traveled in upstate New York and were in a lot of small towns in the summer with Spydora. So if we just wanted to start with somebody new, you could go to tree, create a tree if you wanted to do that. So search all collections. That means census, marriage, military, everything. We put in Alonzo, whoops. I should use tab. Crounse, well, place your ancestor might have lived, well, I know he lived in Binghamton. Usually it pops right up. Let's pretend I don't know his birth year. Search. Oh, what did I do? I put in Alonzo
I
Crounse.
thought you wanted Roberson.
I did.
Robertson, whatever you all wanna call it.
That's right, you have to get a t-shirt. The Robertson versus Roberson. I grew up here, we always called it Roberson. My family. Okay, so I've got 268,000 results, okay, too much. But usually the first few are okay. Now, mistakes. Alonza, female,
Oh,
wrong. But it's, it could be Mrs. Roberson, or it could be, you know, they made a mistake. So over here, this is another bonus with Ancestry. They kind of spell it out without having to look at the actual record, but I like looking at the actual records. You know, lived on Front Street. Now, Alonza, 73. So it's him. They just did it wrong. Something came wrong. And then these, which I always think is fascinating to look at, are the servants that worked in the house. You can find out a lot of information about them. But I will show you the actual record. Very hard to read. They do highlight who you're looking for. Over here, they usually write the name of the street, you know, because they're going door to door. And then if you click on, if you leave the, you know, hover, it'll tell you that's Alonzo, relates the head of the household, gender females, okay, somebody made a mistake there. Race, goes all the way across, tells you where he was born, where he lives. Down here, we are on one of his, on Clarity, it was the housekeeper. And the other gentleman, I think was what they called the houseman, works for a private family. And you can get a ton of information from the census. You can also figure out who lived next door, who lived in the mansion across the street. You know, you start to, if you're from here, you start to recognize names. And depending on the census worker, you know, the legibility differs a lot.
so 1940s, he wasn't even alive in 1940.
1940, so,
He died in the 30s.
no, wait, I got it here.
Wait, when did Alonzo Roberson die?
he lived 1831 to 1899 was senior, and 1867 was to 1934. So again, it's a mistake.
So, yeah, so,
Something-
cause he was
yeah.
born in, he died in the thirties, but she died in the early fifties.
Right, so it was
And-
probably her, it should have been
And then-
Margaret Roberson.
And then 2 servants.
Right, and 2 servants. So if we want, let's say we wanna narrow this, I mean, we could narrow it to just census, that's still 30,000. We could narrow it to birth and marriage, you can add more information, we could add the dates. So if I go over to census, we're gonna get just the census, well, let's go to,
I wonder if
you know,
this was-
one census. Let's go to the 20s. There we go, Alonzo Roberson, male, age 63. And there, his wife was 10 years younger than him, Margaret, who we could not find earlier on Find a Grave, but we know she exists. And it gives you all that information. And I think it's interesting to look from census to census if the same, people worked for them or if it changed. Because by what I understand, he had a driver that stayed with him for many, many, many years. Again, the record can be very difficult to read, like this one. And this one is not highlighted, so then you have to kind of search. So not in ABC order, but it is Front Street.
30.
We want 30, so there's 30 front, and there's Alonzo Roberson, head of household, and it gives you that other information as well. So the census is a great, also a good place to start when you're looking for, you know, someone, to get as much information as you can from someone. I mean, try to get what you can from your family, and again, I think cemeteries are, you know, give you a great deal of information. Just see, let's go to 1920 again. Let's just click on, and it gives you all that same information about the servants that lived in the house.
Biracial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always find it interesting if they're married but they're live-in servants. I don't know what kind of life that, I mean, did they have days off or they went home? I don't know. Cause it gives their address as Front Street. Cause if you've been through the mansion, there is the quarters where they, other people that worked in the house lived. So that's, I think, always very interesting as well. So if we wanted to, you can, you know, narrow it down or go back out and, you know, choose another census. I'll choose 1900. Now there we get Mrs. Alonzo Roberson, but Mrs. Emma. So is that, again, you have to wonder, kind of figure out, Shenango Street, 308, and then I always go drive and look if I can find these houses. Cause I just think it's fascinating.
Well, the Robersons didn't move here until the 1900s, to
Right,
1907.
1905, yeah, when it was being built. So this is probably Alonzo Senior, and Tilly, I'm assuming, is a roomer, not necessarily someone who worked for them, but was renting a room. And she was a dressmaker, and then I always wonder, who did she work in the clothing factory? You know, if you like local history, if you like history in general, your mind just, you get totally off task. Like I'm supposed to be working on my own family tree, and I'll look up somebody, I'll be reading one of these books, and then I'm gone, I'm done, I'm trying to find out all this other information. So that's, you know, the census. So if we go back out to another kind of Gilded Age person was Kilmer, Willis Sharp Kilmer, lived in the mansion that's still standing next to the synagogue. And then next to him, where my mother lives at 5 Riverside Towers, there was another, Kilmer's had twin mansions next to each other. Jonas was in the one that's gone, and Willis was in the 9, which is still there. So Willis was a very interesting character. I don't know if you, he was, swamp root. He took swamp root from kind of a very small company run out in Sanitary Springs to what he used to say was worth $2 million a year. And he was married several times and tended to get in trouble. He actually had like a public fight with one of his wives, and the press, one of the local papers, printed it, and he was so angry about it that he started his own press, built his own paper. That's in the press building that is downtown now, that I believe is housing, student housing. But he was a very powerful person. So his records are interesting. There's the census, but let's go to birth and marriage. So let's see. Wait, did I go to obituary? Let's go to marriage and divorce. Okay. So here's when he married Sarah Jane Wells in October of 1932. I love this mistake. Paris, New York. They got married in Paris, France, but Paris, New York, USA.
How'd you find out they were married in Paris, France, and not New York?
I found a newspaper article
Okay,
on the Evening Press.
okay.
And now here his occupation is publisher. Now, his occupation comes up as publisher, comes up as horse trainer, comes up as businessman, comes up as entrepreneur. If you're just looking to practice on somebody, he's pretty interesting to practice on. So we've also got, he was married in 1909, and that was Esther. And then he was also married in 1895, and that was Beatrice. So there was three Mrs. Kilmers. Very difficult to find. What are you doing? Is there a bug? Oh,
It's a wasp.
hello. Oh, he's over there.
It's a wasp.
Here comes Susie.
I'm one of the people
she'll
that would
dispose
take
of
it and
them.
put it outside, but our other friendly
That's so
citizens
weird. I was working on this last night, and a bug was flying around in my office at home.
Can you show a picture of them?
And
Of Kilmer?
how did you think to look at Paris, New York as not Paris, New York? How did you think?
I thought, because I sort of know New York State, I'm like, but there could be a Paris, New York, so I Googled, I always have Google open, I Googled Paris, New York, I'm like, well, that's not right. So then I think I went to newspapers, and, newspaper, was that it? Newspaper Marriage Index. Oh, and that's my other tip that I forgot to tell you. Always keep a notebook and a pencil with you, because it's so irritating when you have to keep clicking and going back. So anything, a date or a piece of information, I have these all over my house, and I just jot, so you don't have to keep, going back. I think this was it. Was this the right? Okay, so then they make you join, which I find so irritating, newspapers.com. I think I was able to, that was it, Willis Sharp Kilmer wed Sarah Jane Wells in Paris. And it's Paris, France, because my husband helped me blow it up, so I could read a little bit of that. Kilmer's grave, see, I get all off topic, is very interesting. He's in Floral, and he made sure he wanted to be buried at the highest point in the cemetery, so he bought that plot, and it's really something. Floral Ave and Spring Forest are worth a walk, on a nice day to see that. Now, if I can find a picture of Kilmer, if not, I'm pretty sure I have one in the books. Actually, no, let's do this. You can always Google. There he is.
Yeah, he was just on, they just had on PBS or WSPG, another one of the Binghamton history.
And was it about Exterminator? Was it the one about the
It
horse?
was one about Binghamton history.
Yeah.
One about Swamp Group and him, and then his brother or whoever was the one who was he was the marketing man.
Yes.
And the other one was, I can't remember what the other one was.
It was his, it was his uncle, I think, that actually
He
made,
was up
discovered
there. He had a big beard.
swamp brew. And
And this
then,
guy was a good looking guy.
yeah, he's, I mean, interesting. Oh, there it is, WSKG,
Yeah.
it's right there. But they also have one about Exterminator, that was the horse that he
Yeah,
owned
that
that
was
won the
good too.
Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
And that horse and Sunbriar are buried in a pet cemetery up by the zoo.
Is that it up there, right there, is the horse?
And always on Derby Day, if you drive up to the cemetery, people have decorated the tombstones. I usually go up on Derby Day, to see Exterminator. And where Lourdes is, and actually if you're looking at Lourdes, there's the, Unitarian Church, and then there's a large white, which is now empty,
Oh, it is.
mansion. That was part of the horse farm.
It's the clubhouse.
What's going on?
Yeah, their
with
farm
the-
ran from Beethoven, where Lourdes is, up to
Right.
Margaret.
Yeah,
That entire
that
length.
whole part of the river, yep. And then his, home was a few blocks, the other way.
So what's going on with that white mansion? It's sad that that's a.
The nuns used to live there,
The
but they're
nuns were
not
living
there.
in it, and then,
Oh.
it's empty, and I don't know if Ascension or Lourdes owns it now, but like, I keep seeing like orange cones on the steps, and we walk behind there.
Yeah, I
and you
did
can
too.
see the roof is coming
Yeah,
apart.
right, it's not looking so good.
So, I'll have to bring that up at a past meeting, because they usually put properties that need to be, an eye needs to be kept on them. So, I hope they do that. There's so many in Binghamton, unfortunately, that, are not, are not well taken care of. So we've got census, you've got marriage, and death. Divorce records are very hard to find. I've been trying to find Kilmer's divorce records, because I imagine they would be fascinating. But I haven't been able to come across those. That's on my list of things to do. So another kind of record I wanted to show you was military. So a local, person who's dear to my heart and Susie's as well, because we used to teach, lessons, is Rod Serling. Rod Serling served in World War II. He was a paratrooper in the Philippines. He grew up, I grew up about a block from where he grew up, and that was the big lore in the neighborhood when we were kids, was to go over and skate by Rod Serling's house, or walk the dog over by Rod Serling's house. So again, I'm just putting in the basics. I do know when he was born, but I don't want you to think you have to have that information, but a good place to get that information is find a grave, because it would be on the tombstone. So, right away we get his draft card. He enlisted right after he graduated from high school in 1943.
He graduated in December.
December, and then he
He enlisted,
in
right?
January, a month later. He ruddy complexion, I'm like,
I
wow.
like that.
And then his, next of kin. And you can actually look at the draft cards, which I can actually see his handwriting. I think that is, it's just a history person that I am. Gives you his date of birth. He was born on Christmas Day in 24. He was born in Syracuse and moved to Binghamton soon after. So, and his address here is 140 Chapin, which is interesting because he actually was on Bennett Ave. That was, the house that we were all fascinated by. So something happened, and I'm pretty sure it was the passing of his father, that they had to sell the house and move. His father passed while he was serving, and the Army would not let him come home for his father's funeral, which I think affected him for the rest of his life. If you're a Twilight Zone fan, if you start to find out a little bit about his background, you can really see the messages in those episodes. One of my favorites is Walking Distance, which is sort of autobiographical and takes place in what I'm sure is Rec Park. So here's his enlistment, which is basically the same, but those military records, and now if you get this, you can get it, but you probably have to send away for it. National Archives is a good place to look for military records. my mother had to send away to prove that she was related to someone in the cemetery where she wants to be buried. Cause they won't let you, cause the plot where her parents are is full. And so where her great-grandparents are, there's a couple spaces, and it's so maudlin to talk about, but it's life. So she had to get documentation, and she had to send stuff away to the state of Pennsylvania to prove that she was related so she can be buried there. So stuff like that you never thought you'd have to think about. He was enlisted. He did, Susie, correct me if I'm wrong, I know he got the Purple Heart. He was injured. He saw terrible things, which, all soldiers, I think, unfortunately see terrible things, and it affected him for the rest of his life. So we can narrow again and just go to his records, but you gotta be careful. Rodman Sterling, Rodman Edward Sterling, Rodman Edward Sterling, Paul R. Sterling. Okay, so I don't even know why that comes up, but it does. And he passed away in 1975, actually while he was recovering from open heart surgery.
In Rochester.
In Rochester.
Yeah.
So he was a very heavy smoker, which they think that's why.
And high stress.
High
and,
stress, yeah. High stress as
And
well
PTSD.
from all that. So I'm like, well, we did all men. I said, I gotta come up with some Binghamton women, has many famous people. And actually, if you put in noteworthy people, Binghamton, New York, Wikipedia has a huge list. I was really surprised. So, but this one, I always talk about when I do the tours of downtown Binghamton. The Preservation Association does a spirits tour at Halloween. So Overita Booth Henderson.
That's an interesting first name.
Really?
Yes. Now, she did not live in Binghamton, but she's buried in Binghamton. I just happen to know. She lived in Providence, Rhode Island. All right, so we get nothing. I got nothing. I mean, I know she exists. She's buried in Glenwood Cemetery. So I'm going to go to my go-to, where I always go. Find a grave.
So is it better to put, like you put Uberita Booth, would it be better just to put Uberita, but so you don't have such a specific?
Yeah, we could try that. Let's try
I'm just
that.
curious.
No, I play around with that stuff all the time. Middle name, no middle name, middle
Will
initial.
it make a difference? Yeah.
Let's see. Now, I happen to know that she's buried in Glenwood Cemetery, which is that JC? I think. Well, let's put Broome County. When all else fails, I put Broome County, if I'm not sure. There she is. Glenwood Cemetery. So, and a nice thing about Find a Grave too is there's often like narratives that people have put in. There's a huge one for my Lorenzo Crounse. It tells you, notice anything about her parents that's interesting.
John Wilkes Booth?
John Wilkes Booth.
What?
Okay, so this is fascinating to me. She's in here, and apparently she was an actress and was performing at the Stone Opera House, got pneumonia, died, and back then you were buried where you died. So she was buried in Glenwood Cemetery. I don't know if you can see it, it says, daughter of Isola Mills and John Wilkes Booth. So apparently in the 70s, a descendant of hers, because she was in an unmarked grave, but they had records, had done a ton of research and found out that John Wilkes Booth was her father. But last night I was on, and I got distracted and started researching. There's also a myth online that they were not. He was not her father. He couldn't have been there at that time. So in here it says that yes, she was. It's on her tombstone. So I always tell that story when I'm doing the tour. But again, if you're looking to do some practice research, that might be a fun one to try.
So if you go to John Wilkes Booth and Ancestry, would it give his children, or would you go to the US Census record?
He, as far as I can't figure it out. He was married more than once. He was married in England and apparently abandoned his wife and came here with, the maid, and then had 10 children.
Oh my.
But that woman is not the mother of Ogarita, so it's sort of a soap opera.
Well, she was
You
an
have
actress.
to, you have to kind of figure it out.
She was an actress too, he was an
Yeah,
actor.
he was an actor, actually, many in the family, his father was interesting to read about too. He was an actor as well.
His brother was a Shakespearean actor too.
And, you know, everything I read about is how handsome he was, and he was a ladies' man. So that was just last night I was doing that, it's interesting.
And he was a murderer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and she was very pretty,
He
and,
was an assassin.
you know, it was just, she was with a vaudeville show, she got sick, and she's buried in Glenwood Cemetery. So, we go back here. Now, Helen Gardner, I knew nothing about her, so I wanted to do somebody, you know, that I didn't know too much about. I didn't come up with too much, for her, except it took a little bit, which you have to be patient. I was mentioning earlier, I started a tree for a friend of mine, you know, cause I thought it would be a nice present. And I sent it to her and she's like, ugh, I'm not doing this is tedious. She goes, I have to click on all those leaves and read out. I'm like, okay, it's just an idea. So it's not for everybody. So Helen Gardner was a silent film actress. She was a costume designer and a producer and quite progressive for her time period. So I got in here, and it unfortunately is a fairly common name. She lived on Riverside Drive. Could be her, you know, but I wanted to verify that birth year 1871. I would write that in my notebook so I don't have to keep looking. So then I went to newspapers because I thought, you know, an actress, I might find something about that. And I did. Of course, now I can't find it. That she was performing as Cleopatra. And this is sometimes what you have to do, it's like Helen Gardner, grade 7, I know that's not her, the Post Standard. Let's try that. Married to someone. No, and then, you know, I have to write down married to, keep that information, go back out, and keep going back and forth. So sometimes it really, as my friend Amy said, it is tedious, and it takes a lot of patience, but if it's something, you know, that you like to do, I know I found her playing Cleopatra, but maybe, I should have written it down. But I wanted you to sort of see that it doesn't always just happen. Okay, yeah, featuring Helen Gardner, so I think that was the one that was her. She was, she played Cleopatra, and mostly around town, like around New York State. I couldn't find anything, like in New York City or Hollywood, but I only spent about 10 minutes on this last night, just to show you that it doesn't always just pop
Try
up.
Scranton.
Hmm?
Try Scranton.
Oh, you could try Scranton, that's true,
Well,
Scranton.
that was on the vaudeville circuit.
Right.
Cause the guy that played Lucy Ricardo
Oh, Fred, was
Fred.
it Mertz? Yeah,
mentioned Scranton several times.
right, was he from here? No, the guy from Dick Van Dyke was from here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dick Van Dyke Show, I can't think of that.
Richard somebody.
Yeah, any questions or anything else you'd like me to click back on to see? I'm happy to do that.
3-year research of Willis Kilmer, does it ever come up with Sky Lake location, his hunting
The-
grounds?
Yeah, it comes up with Sanitary Springs. I've seen that come up, but I know where you mean.
Yeah,
We used
because
to go there.
he apparently raised albino deer up there.
Yeah.
And there was like, I worked up there for summers when I was younger, and the director said he had a sighting of one back in the 70s when it was still recorded, because
Oh,
he
wow.
raised them and hunted them himself.
Yeah.
So he was,
I think he
working
really
there.
loved animals. I mean, wasn't such a great husband, but I think he really liked, liked animals. because the horses, by what I understand,